Today, we're very lucky to have with us a legend of funk music, a man who got to start playing drums with the band Slave and later became their vocalist, put out a ton of great music as a solo artist and with his own band, Hall of Fame. Everybody give a round of applause for Mr. Steve Arrington. So you come from a city called Dayton, Ohio.
Absolutely, Andrew. The land of funk. Absolutely. The land of funk.
So tell us a little bit about that, because it definitely was a hotbed of funk music back in the day. And it's not the biggest city, but it produced some of the biggest acts.
Very small town, but big talent. The Ohio Players started it off. Ohio Players, Heat Wave, Slave, Phaso, the group Dayton, Lakeside, and it just goes on. It was just a thing where when the Ohio Players kicked off, we all got inspired. They were so original, and we thought we want to be like the Players. Didn't want to sound like the Players, but wanted to be original like the Players. And so the Dayton sound is not like Motown. It's not a producer-driven sound. It's not like Minneapolis, where you had an artist like Prince, and then the Minneapolis sound sort of has his sort of stamp on it. Dayton is just, we all just got it in and did our own thing, and we developed a style that is known for just originality, just being original.
Now, what do you think it was about the city culturally that kind of inspired that?
I don't know. It's the home of aviation. The Wright brothers are from Dayton. Paul Laurence Dunbar is from Dayton. Just originality and unique thinking. It's a small town, not too much going on. A lot of funk. Trotman, Dayton, Zapp, those guys are from Dayton as well. Dayton and Cincinnati.
Now, is it a real competitive circuit coming up?
Well, the talent shows and Battle of the Bands, we were getting it in. There'd be lines around the corners at the high schools because all those bands ended up being like, national acts. I remember Lakeside, let's see, the Ohio Players were first. We were like maybe 10 years behind those guys, 7 to 10. So Lakeside was the biggest of the guys in my age group. We were coming up. They were called the Young Underground. We all knew everybody's battling for second because Lakeside was going to win. They were that band, and they went on to do some great things. And their band, interesting enough, their local band ended up being more just like what ended up happening when they went national. Some of the other bands were splinters of different groups coming together and then went to a national level with different units. But Lakeside was pretty much the same band from Young Underground locally to their national.
Now, how old were you guys during this Battle of the Band stage?
15, 16, 17, 18.
I guess going back a few steps, when did you personally first discover funk music?
James Brown, straight up. James Brown, Cold Sweat. When I started on drums, you had to have your Cold Sweat beat together. You had to. If you didn't have your next, you come in and do an audition. What's your Cold Sweat beat like? You also had to have your Archie Bell and the Drells beat together. So it was and your Sly Stone. You had to have your Sly Stone, Sex Machine. Those were the groups that you had to have as a drummer. And I started on drums. So trying to think, what else did you have to have together? Also, the doo-wop era was really strong. Betcha by golly, wow, that was happening. Cowboys to girls. Yeah, you had to have your doo-wop groove together because we played behind singing groups. And singing groups were still happening before self-contained bands really took off. So I was in that era between singing groups were just starting to fade, self-contained bands were coming in. James Brown had made it to where just the rhythm section was the focal point. versus a lot of production that was happening before. So everything was changing when I was coming up. And then all of a sudden the rock thing, started happening, like bands like Deep Purple, bands like Led Zeppelin. We started to get influenced by that. Me particularly, yes, I was influenced by Yes. So it was just a collection of a lot of things going on when I was coming up.
Yeah, it seemed like a great era for kind of cross-genre blends and things of that nature.
Yes, absolutely. I was totally into it too. I just ate it up. I was crazy. I went to all the shows I could get get my money up. You know what I'm saying? Back then, shows were $4, $5, $6, $7. Yeah, it's not like that today. But yeah.
Do you remember the first concert you went to?
Well, the first concert, my teacher took me to see Canned Heat and John Lee Hooker. My 7th grade teacher, art teacher, she was like a hippie chick. And I used to write poetry, and I was, we'd have, like, Friday, you'd bring your music to school, right? And, we brought our Jackson 5 to school. I brought my Jackson 5. But I also brought my Grand Funk Railroad to school. I brought Led Zeppelin. And so she noticed that musically I was a little bit more abroad in my thinking, than some of the other people that were bringing music to school. And so she asked me, would you be interested in checking out this Canned Heat John Lee Hooker concert at Wittenberg College? And I'm like, yeah. And that was my first show in the 7th grade. Although I did play a lot of shows at this place called the Lakeview Palladium in Dayton as the opening act with a group I played drums in called So Illusions and Eluders. And we opened for people like Spider Turner, Irma Franklin, Aretha Franklin's sister, and Joe Tex and people like that. So I played on some shows, but the actual first show that I actually went to was Canned Heat and John Lee Hooker.
So you're already performing at a very young age then?
Yes. My brother's band, the Soul Agents, I played congas and bongos. That's all I remember is music. I just remember music forever, as long as I've been alive almost.
Did you grow up in a real musical household?
Yes. My brother played saxophone, and my mother was a music lover. We'd have cleanup Saturday where we had to clean up the house, and she'd play some Mongo Santa Maria. She'd play Ray Barretto, a lot of jazz, and a lot of Motown, and my mother loved early Aretha, so a lot of Aretha Franklin got serious spins at my house.
So a lot of Latin influence in there as well.
Absolutely.
Which I guess kind of brings us to the next stage of your career is you went out to LA and...
Yes. Well, actually San Francisco, the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right after high school, I was like, Dayton is a great place in terms of the musicians, but it's not you can't do a whole thing. You can't get your music going, go to the studio and have a whole business scene in Dayton. You have to go somewhere else. So I went out to the West Coast. Lakeside went out to L.A. I went to the Bay Area, San Francisco area. And I met Coke Escovedo, and this is a funny story. My buddy and I, we were just riding around. I was just getting hip to the scene. I'd been out there about a month and a half. We go for a ride, and he goes, yo, man, that's Coke Escovedo over there watering his lawn. That's not Coke Escovedo, man, the keyboard, the percussionist for Santana. No way. Yeah, it is. So I go over there and I say, hey, man, I'm just out of here from Ohio. I'm not trying to bother you right now, but, man, I love what you do, and I'm trying to make it out here. Can I get an audition? If anybody needs a drummer, here's a number for me, blase. He said, yeah, well, I happen to have a friend of mine. He was what did he play? Flute player. So yeah, come on out, do this audition. It happened to be at his house. did the audition, got the gig, and Coke said, you know, I'm feeling what you're doing. I want you to be my drummer as well. So I went from just getting it together to next thing I know, I got this gig with the flute player who opened up for Coke Escovedo. And then I'm playing with Coke Escovedo, and I end up moving in his house, and he decided to take me under his wing and show me this whole salsa Latin thing, because he said, his words were, you can play the notes, but you have to understand the language of the music. And that's what he taught me, the language of the music. And then I applied that to different styles of music. It's not just the notes, it's deeper than that.
Now, what was a Coke Escovedo show like in those days?
Well, you know, he was one of the first guys to do like Latin soul. His album Coming At You and the self-titled album Coke, they were just awesome tracks, funky Latin soul. Also, I met Sheila Escovedo. She came and sat in with us one time. He says, I want you to meet my niece. She plays percussion. I'm like, yeah? A female percussionist? Never heard of that. Yeah, I said, well, how old is she? I think she's about 19, 18, 19. Oh, okay. So we meet, and she sits down and begins to rip. We were all just looking over like, man, who is this? She was smoking. At 19, she was killing it. First time we'd ever seen a female percussionist. And we formed that relationship there, and I ended up playing with them a little bit later, her and her father, Pete. But I loved playing that music because it was soulful, but then it added a whole nother element that you weren't getting into the Midwest at that time, because the Midwest was just into Santana and some of the jazz things, but that salsa, Latin soul thing hadn't really happened yet in the Midwest.
And then, I guess roughly around this same time, Slave had formed.
Yes, 77.
And you were not involved in their earliest incarnation.
No, they did 2 albums before I joined, but most of the members, I'd say half of the members in Slave, we were in a local band together called the Young Mystics. I was 4 years older than most of those guys. Slave, we all went to high school together, many of us, but I was the oldest of the younger bunch, because Slave had guys in their 30s, and then there had guys like were 16, 17 years old. So I was in between. So when I was 18, Mark Adams, the bass player, Mark Drac Hicks, the guitar player, Danny Webster, guitar player, those guys were like freshmen going into their sophomore year. So I was a little older than them. But they hit Slide while I was out in California with the Escovedos. I said, man, I like this track, Slide. Went and bought the album. There was my homies. I'm like, oh, they jumped off. So I was real happy and excited for them.
What eventually brought you back to Ohio and working with Slave?
Well, we had did a tour with Pete and Sheila Escovedo, and the tour was over. Slave said they wanted to do a change in their drum situation, and Mark Adams called me up and said, hey, man, we're going to do a drum change. Why don't you come back to Ohio and join the band? And I was like, this is great. I had just finished this tour with Pete and Sheila, looking what was going to be my next move. And I came back to Ohio, and first joint I did with them on drums was Stellar Funk.
Maybe we should play that. So what do you recall about the recording of that track?
Oh, man, that's some funk right there, man. Ooh. I mean, you know, we had come from Dayton. We had grew up in high school. We had dreams. We wanted to make it. And here I was playing with my homies, playing some heavyweight funk. I mean, that funk. I remember Atlantic Studios in the big speakers, Studio A, when we mixed it, and we all listened back and was like, that is some serious funk right there. Just excited. I'm just excited. Listening to it now is just the same as when I first heard it. And of course, it was my recording debut, so on drums. And I was like, also the guy, we are stellar. That was me too. That was my vocal debut, you know what I'm saying? So I'm listening back to it 30 years later, actually about 33 years later, just as moved and touched by it as the first time I ever heard it.
So you sung on a few tracks on that album, The Concept.
Yes, mostly background vocals. I did a lead on a song, Coming Soon. Mm-hmm.
Had you previously had much singing experience?
I sang with a lounge band called the Murphys. Prior to that, in Dayton, I was the drummer. I never was known as a singer. I never really got into singing much. But I'd sing to myself and around, close friends and my family. But the scene didn't know I could sing. And so I joined this band called the Murphys, and they were doing the lounge circuit, and we were kind of on our way, hopefully, to get into the whole Vegas thing. So I used to sing, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. I mean, just all the joints, But what it did for me, it got me into different character voices and different styles of singing. And when I joined Slave, they were like, hey, man, can you sing? And I'm like, yeah, no, I can do a little something, man. And I developed my style more listening to instrumentalists than coming up being a singer. So I think that's part of why my vocal style was a little different.
So who were some of those influences on your vocal style?
John Coltrane's horn playing, number one. Miles Davis' approach on trumpet. And there were some singers as well, Stevie Wonder for sure, Sly Stone, and again, Yes, John Anderson from Yes. But mostly, I would just mimic, Jimi Hendrix solos. I would just mimic their solos, not thinking of being a singer doing it, just being, getting it in. I'm throwing the joint on, and the solo just captured me, and I try to mimic it and learn them note for note, never thinking I was going to end up singing and then approach singing more from that perspective.
So by the next Slave album, you kind of stepped up your role as the singer. What led to that?
Well, they started to see, let's add Arrington to the mix. So we were in the studio doing a song, Just a Touch of Love. And we had the track done, and we had some background vocals done on it, but we hadn't had a lead on it. And so we went around the different singers, and, Slave was more like the Temptations. Like on Slide, you have 3 different singers, and usually we traded off. And we all went around the mic, took a turn to come up with a lead for Just a Touch of Love. And nothing was really working that really fit. And they said, Steve, you go out there and do something. And I'm like, oh, okay. Had no words, I'm just, and they're like, yo, man, that sounds kind of crazy. Let's try that. So I came up with some words, say, let's go back to the hotel. Came up with some words. And then I sang it, Just a Touch of Love, and Jimmy Douglas was like, the intervals are interesting that you're using. It's a little different. And your tone, it's kind of different. And we were all wondering what to do with it. They were like, we feel it's hot, but it's different. But it went with it, and thank God he did. And it kind of led to me being a singer.
Well, let's give Just a Touch of Love a listen. Now, what kind of response did you guys get when you would play that song out?
Oh, people loved it. People loved that song. And today, my band, as we play that music, people sing along, young people my age group. I don't know. It's a blessing. I played drums on that track, and that's one of the best drum tracks I think I ever did, just to lock up. I listened to the drums and I'm like, man, God is good. It's just locking, and I'm a fan of the music. When I listen to it, I don't listen to it as an artist. I listen to it as a fan, and it moves me, whether I made it or not. It's just like, it moves me. So I'm listening to it just like, man, that's doing something for me right now. It's doing something for me. And that's the way it always, when I hit it live, it's the same way. It's no different than when I listen to Miles or I listen to Prince, stuff that moved me. When I listen to the music that I've been able to be a part of, it's the same thing.
So you were pulling double duty as drummer and vocalist for Slave.
Yes.
How did that play out in a live setting?
Well, I did play and sing for a while, like Buddy Miles. And then they brought me out front. But I continued to play drums on the albums. Roger Parker, who was the drummer with Fazo and a good friend of mine coming up, I suggested that we get him into the band, and then he ended up playing live, and he actually ended up playing with me later when I did my own thing. But I played most of the tracks on the albums, even though I was singing up front.
Now, did you notice a different response from the public to you when you were a drummer versus when you were a singer?
No, I know just people who knew me in Dayton were shocked that it's like, who's doing vocals? Steve Arrington. What? Arrington singing? Yeah, man. He's got a quirky style, doesn't he? Yeah, who knew? I'm going the same way. Who knew? I mean, I'm just going, yo, man, I'm singing. So it was funny, because I didn't know how to command the stage and none of that, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, okay, we're doing shows with Gap Band, we're doing shows with Kool and the Gang. I'm like, okay, JT's going to the front and he's hollering at the ladies. Okay, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. And I'm like, yeah. And, I didn't know. I learned right on the job, you know what I mean? And the band gave me love and said, go for it, Arrington, you know what I mean? And so I learned how to be a front man, because I never was in that role. I was always in the back. And I was content with being in the back. I had no aspirations of being a singer. I had no aspirations of being a front man or any of that. God gave me that. That's all I can say. That's just the truth. He just gave me that. And I went with it, and I developed a style, and I learned how to deal with an audience, and I learned all those things, and I appreciate all the guys that I watched, like JT from Kool and the Gang, and Charlie Wilson, and others, on how to command a stage, and those guys had been doing it for years, and I'd been the drummer. So it was crazy, but people gave me love.
Now, in the era when you guys were doing your thing, kind of that late 70s, early 80s vibe, it seemed like funk was changing. The sound, it was getting cleaner and kind of like more syncopated and tighter. What do you think pushed it in that direction?
I just think, like all music, things happen for a while, and then a style is done, and then someone has a different look at things. They hit, and then all of a sudden, someone else has a different look. It's just that simple, Funk changed because it had gone a certain way, and somebody else had a different view. Just like my vocal approach. It just sort of happened. I just had a different view. And I think that's how it always is. Somebody who's dedicated, and it has to be honest. A different view is honest. That's the main thing, and that's what changes music. Someone has an honest view that you can feel, and then things start to move with it.
Now, with that distinctive vocal approach that you brought to the table, did you see people picking up on it after you?
Absolutely. I heard people starting to use my intervals and my diction. I started hearing time and mine in songs, make you mine, my diction on that. In time, I started hearing that a lot in different songs. And that I was excited about that because I'm like, yo, man, people are starting to pick up and feel where I'm coming from. And I started to listen to singers like Nat King Cole, his diction. And so later, after I became a vocalist, I started to listen to singers. And then I noticed people who were listening to me. And that was an exciting thing for me, that people, because for me, every day doing this was something I didn't expect. So the people feeling my style and hearing my intervals, how I was doing it, meant a lot to me.
Well, let's hear a little bit more of that. What do you think? Watching You?
Yeah, let's do Watching You.
So that was from your third album with Slave.
Yes.
And you recorded one more album with them.
Yes, Showtime.
And then went off in your own direction.
Yes, absolutely.
What inspired this transition?
Well, the thing with Slave, after the first album, there were always people coming and going. The reason for that, I'm not exactly sure. It just seemed like there was just an instability from the business side of things. It was a great band, great bunch of guys, great talent, but the business end never could stand eye to eye with us. The business, the people that you have doing your business have to be on the level of your talent so that your talent can be fully realized and go where it needs to go, especially after you first hit. If the business end of it is not up to that level, it ends up pulling you down. Slave, it was just people coming and going. I was never actually a member. That's why I'm sort of saying I'm not exactly sure, because even though I was playing drums on the records and I became the primary vocalist of Slave, I never was a signed member of the group. I was always a sideman. That's a strange scenario. But within that, there were certain things I wasn't privy to on how things were rolling and how things were running. So I would just say the business couldn't stand eye to eye with the music.
So how did you go about forming Hall of Fame from there?
Well, some of the rest of us who were sidemen, like Roger Parker, I said, hey, man, I'm going to do my thing, and if you guys want to come with me, we're not actually a part of Slave. You can be in my band, and we'll have a band, and you guys are all signed along with me. Charles Carter, Sam Carter, Roger Parker, Victor Gotze, Arthur Rames, and who's from New York, actually. Arthur is, rest in peace. They came with me and we did Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame.
How did the rest of Slave respond to that departure?
Well, because people were coming and going, excuse me. People were coming and going. Stevie Washington, who was one of the co-founders with Mark Hicks, had left. He and Starlina Young and Kirk Jones had left and formed Aura prior to my leaving. They left after the Stone Jam album. I knew then there was a crack in the wall then when they left. I stayed for another album, and it was hard for me. I didn't have aspirations of going out and doing the solo lead singer thing. You know what I mean? That's not what it was at all. When I left the band, it hurt because these are the guys that I came up with. And also we had formed a bond and a sound together that I thought was very special and unique. So it wasn't like, yo, man, I'm tired of this and that. I'm gonna do my own thing and later for them. It hurt bad, and it was like a divorce. We were friends, though. When they did their follow-up album, when they were working on it, we would go listen to the car and listen to the tracks as they would listen to the things I was doing because we were friends. It's just the business end wasn't together. So they showed me love and I showed them love, and all the different camps that split from Slave, we were all happy for each other that we were making good records, and I was excited about that.
Now, was it creatively liberating to kind of step into more of a band leader situation?
Yes, because I was able to bring different things to the table that wouldn't work on a Slave record. Like, there's a song I did on Steve Arrington's Hall of Fame one called Betty Bye. Betty Bye's the right time for us. Very jazzy sounding. As a matter of fact, Tribe Called Quest did a sample of it with The Chase Part 2. I loved how they flipped it, by the way. I dug that. But those were the types of things that I was into that really wouldn't work on a Slave record. And also, I had more control of how far I wanted to take the music, you know. So, you know, you'd have a song like Weak at the Knees, and then you'd have a song like Betty Bye, which are totally different styles and different vibes. And that's what was cool for me. I was able to get into some of the influences that I'd had through the years that didn't really fit so much in the Slave formula.
Let's give Betty Bye a listen. So I was reading the credits for that Hall of Fame album, and I had no idea how many instruments you actually played on it. I was surprised.
Yeah, I played guitar on Betty Bye. I actually wrote that song from the guitar part. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. That era, people started to branch out. Prince played a lot of instruments. I think we all were influenced by Stevie Wonder. It's like Stevie Wonder played so many instruments, and he was totally original, or is totally original on all of them. And so I think that era, people started to branch out and think, oh, I can do more, I can do more, I can do more. And so I played bass on Nobody Can Be You But You, and I played guitar on Betty Bye, and played some keys on some things as well.
Now, what was your songwriting process in those days?
It varied. You know, we'd do a track and then, you know, I'd sing on top of it. Sometimes I'd sing some melodies and some things, and then we built the track around that. It just sort of varied. And, you know, with us being a band, we were around each other all the time, and we were grooving and jamming all the time. And we'd get into something and say, yo, let's keep that part right there, and sort of piece things together.
Now, shortly thereafter, and I'm jumping ahead a little just for the sake of time, but you started moving away from the secular towards more spiritual music. Mm-hmm. What motivated that?
Well, a lot of my heroes, John Coltrane for me is, when I listen to his music, not only do I hear the technique and the greatness of his artistry from a technical point of view and his ability to be able to play what he heard. He had the facility to do that. But there was a deeper dimension when I listened to his music, and the spiritual dimension, the spiritual side to it, that really drew me. Also, I come from a line of preachers, and church was very important to me when I was little. My great uncle, Charles Cook, used to call me music. There's little music. When I was just coming up, and he used to preach, and I used to remember sitting in the pew going, man, his passion. And that's sort of what's in my singing as well. I have an unbridled passion that I just let it go. I don't know how beautiful it sounds. I don't even care. I just got to let it out. I got that from watching my uncle preach. He just went at it. And so as I developed, and, you know, Carlos Santana, I think people were getting into Eastern religion, even the Beatles, and, you know, Stones sort of dabbled into it as well. It was always a part of me. I had to go there. I had to get into it. And so I got saved in New York, actually. There was a guy walking down the street and around 45th, 42nd, around that area, holding up a sign, wearing a sign. I mean, we've seen these guys before. And I remember being on a tour bus earlier thinking, man, there's got to be more to it than this. I was having a good time, but that spiritual thing in me had to develop. And so this guy was just standing there, and I'm like, yo, man, you're hardcore, man. I got my Jerry curls, and I mean, I'm hardcore, and I'm hardcore with mine. I'm walking down the street, you know, sometimes I'd have my rollers in my hair. So when I took them out, my flips joint, I flipped my joints out. Y'all seen Snoop? I did that way for Snoop. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, yo, I'm hard, but I'm like, I'm not as hard as you. You were holding up a sign, Jesus is coming, wearing one. I'm like, what's up with that? He took me through some scriptures, and I received the Lord right there on the street in New York. And I've been loving the Lord ever since. It was real. My music had to go in that direction. My spirituality, like I said, yes, the people that I was into, that spiritual side was a part of their music. And so I went with it and loved every second of it. I've been a preacher. I've been an evangelist, a praise and worship leader. I've had my own church. I love the Lord. I love people who enjoy, you know, finding out why. You know what? I mean, this is all great what we're talking about, and I love every second of it. But then there's those times when we're alone and we go, why? What is this? What am I doing? What am I here for? What's going on? For me, that's the road it took. Mm-hmm.
You also went on a long hiatus thereafter.
Yes. I was gone 25 years. I guess I didn't have anything else to say. And I mean that. Sometimes you say, you make your statement with your music or whatever you're doing, and then I didn't have anything else to say. Now, I don't mean that I couldn't have made another record. I don't mean I couldn't have hit some more lyrics. I mean, I just, that's all I had to say for that time. What I needed to say was in something else, which was just, you know, I used to just pray for hours and hours in a day just to get closer to God, and I did, and I came out, it was just love. What I found out after hours of prayer and hours of study and going on missionary trips, and I mean, the whole nine, on the streets, leading people to the Lord like I was led to the Lord. After all of that, I found something out. What? It's just love. It's just that simple. And so after 25 years, it was like, well, what are you doing? You're coming back on the scene? Yeah, why? Man, because I just want to love on somebody. I mean, I've done it in a church. I just want to love on people. I just want to be here right now, Red Bull Academy, just saying, yo, man, it's about love. Bottom line. And that's what it's not the politics of religion. Had to find out about all the politics and all of that. And it's like, well, it's just love. And when I listen to this music, talking to you, when I see these people, I'm just honored right now that I can be here to say, you know what? At the end of the day, it's about our love for one another. That's what lasts. That's what is really powerful. That's what you take with you. Can't take the money with you. You know, can't take the hype with you. The sandwiches, the hype sandwiches are gone. It's just love. And so that's why I came back. And I'm a person I'm emotionally funky. If you understand what I mean, I'm emotionally funky. I don't give a flip. I just want to go in and just love somebody if they'll let me. If they're not feeling it, I can dig that and understand that. I'll just love somebody else. You know what I mean? I mean, really, it's just really that simple. because that's in my 25 years of searching and searching and searching, and scriptures and books and study, and for a long time I threw all my albums out. I didn't watch secular TV. It was just Jesus, 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 100 church, and go for a ride in the country. That's my thing. I love going for rides, but that's all I did, and I loved it. But then the Lord is like, yo, man, share some of this love outside of the four walls of the church. Okay. Now it's today.
So let's talk about today a little. You're
Okay.
working on a new album
Yes,
with Dame Funk.
Dame Funk, absolutely.
What do you think of that whole scene that he's part of in LA?
I love it. You know, before I left, I was doing work with Kool Moe Dee on his Funky Funky Wisdom album. Also, I got involved with hip hop. Prior to that, I think it was 3 Times Dope. We did a thing of Week in the Knees. So I embraced hip hop, you know, and that's my thing. I'm always, whatever today is, I'm in it. You know, I'm not a guy who's like, well, all they doing is pushing faders and turning knobs. You know, they ain't no musicians and samples and Hey, that's your thing. I'm not, you know, that's your thing. That's fine. I'm not saying that's not a place for your thoughts. That's yours. But for me, I want to be around the guys pushing knobs, turning, you feel me? I want to be in today. That's always where I've been at. So before I left the game, I was connecting with hip hop. The underground scene, instead of me saying, I want to get what this big major label going, I was studying underground music. I was listening to Raz G. You know, I was checking people out, you know, and then Dame Funk hit me up he said, yo, man, on a social network page and said, I'm doing this funk thing. I'm trying to keep it going. Would you do a 12-inch? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. He says, hey, I'm on the underground scene. I said, let's do it. I had been studying underground music anyway, as I knew I was going to get back into this thing. I love it, man. I've been kicking it with Madlib. I love Madlib. I love what Flying Lotus is doing. I'm vibing on Hudson Mohawk. I mean, I'm vibing on all of it. You know, that's always the way I've been, and it's always the way I'm going to be. I want to tell you this story. This is very important. When I was 16, I went to a show. I saw a group called Hot Tuna. The bass player and the guitar player were musicians that were in Jefferson Airplane. They had a side project, Hot Tuna. There was a violinist. His name was Papa John Creech. I was 16 years old. Papa John Creech was way older than the guys in Hot Tuna. They were in their 20s, and Papa John Creech was in his 40s in my mind. I couldn't even go into the 50s. Found out he was in his 50s. But I looked up at him, and I thought, look at this guy. Here's this older dude, and you know, when you're 16, a dude 40, let's keep it real, that dude is old. And Papa John Creech was getting it in playing violin. And I said, I want to be like him. That's what I want to do. I want to be an older guy who still gets it on whatever's going on today. I said that when I was 16 years old, and here I am. I'm 57 years old now. And I'm still getting it in, and I appreciate what young people are doing. I let them influence me. I'm like, well, you made Just a Touch of Love. Listen, if I'm feeling it, and these young people, they're influencing me, I'm influencing them, that's the way it's supposed to be. And so, you know, I'm lucky to be able to be in front of you guys here today. I'm looking at these young people. Y'all care about what I'm doing? Oh, okay. I care about what you're doing. I care about what you think. So yeah, the Dame Funk thing, I was like, let's do it, homie. Let's get it in.
Let's check out one of those tracks.
All right. Persecute my funk and my history will prove you a lie. Oh, yeah.
One of the fascinating things to me about that collaboration is I feel like there's kind of a direct line from that old school Dayton scene to the scene that produced Dame?
Absolutely. Dame was very influenced by what happened in Dayton, and it made sense. I'm happy for him that, he's doing his thing. I like what we've done together, and, again, it's just a blessing, and that's the way I see it. It's just a blessing. And, I approached that song. It's not done today. It's not that. Persecute my funk and my history will prove you're alive. Well, I'm known for ripping beats. I'm just that kind of fella. It's a different approach. And it's different because I'm not trying to recreate what I did. It's like, it's a much more rhythmical sort of approach that I did vocally to it. And I'm excited about that because I've been listening, I've been absorbing the culture. There's times I have that lullaby melody thing happening, and there's times I'm just going in. I'm like, we just gonna ride the beat. You know what I mean? So, that's kind of the approach on that song.
So when can we expect the album?
Well, we're gonna drop it this summer. Yeah, for sure.
Seems like the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, maybe we'll take some questions.
So, 57, what are you drinking? No, that's not the real question. So from today, what are you excited to do with your existence?
Just continuing to spread love the way I know how to, and making music that I'm excited about, that I continue to challenge myself and push myself forward. I hope to be around a long time. My dream is to be like a B.B. King, and I'm going to ask now, for some reason, I can never remember his name. And I do this every time. And I'm going to tell you because it's fun. So I'm going to ask my wife right now, who's the other guy? Buddy Guy. Now, I just do this thing. I can never remember his name. That's my wife, Leslie. But I hope to be like B.B. King and Buddy Guy, who are in their 70s and 80s and still getting it in, still putting out great music. I hope that I'm that. I've done what Papa John Creech has done. I hope that when I get to be in my 70s and 80s, I'm still looking for that next sweet melody. I'm still looking for that next crazy hot rhythm. And I'm still allowing young people the culture of that time to influence me. And they look at what I've done to study and say, Arrington, he gave his heart. He gave his heart. That's me.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
First off, I want to say I'm originally from Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And I grew up in the 80s, and Slave got plenty of love. I love your music. The funk is really influential to me. So I actually have two questions. Even though I think funk is a feeling, it's one of those things you just have or you don't. What would be a few of the quintessential elements you think in terms of describing the funk genre? And second question, you also mentioned that you were never an official member of Slave, and I also know that they were sampled quite frequently. Mm-hmm. How does that play out in terms of royalties or anything like that business-wise?
Well, I'll deal with the second question first. Royalty-wise, it plays out well because for me particularly, I have my songwriting credits. And so, when the sampling thing really happened and the music was being sampled a lot, with the publishing administrator in place, those percentages and deals were made so that I get paid off of the samples that's been done from the Slave and Hall of Fame music. The first question about what are some of the essential things that make that make funk what it is. I think the emphasis on the bottom, heavy bass lines, hard drums, where in the soul era, the emphasis were more from the middle to the top. You know, it was more about the melodies and more about chordal movement. It was very orchestrated. The soul music of the '60s, and early '70s. You know, the Philly sound and Motown. It was very orchestrated and it was kind of heavy, but funk just went buck wild with the bottom. Another thing I think about funk is that it's really about the people who had a different idea. James Brown stripped it and made it about space and repetitive parts just coming at you over and over with a tight groove. He established what funk is. So I think funk is a time period where certain people, George Clinton, Sly Stone, James Brown, were so honest in their approach, they invented it. So funk is really, we're all funksters, we're all children of James, George, and Sly. Because those are the people who had the unique ability to speak in such an honest way that we all said, man, we gotta get in on that. And they spoke in that way from that bottom, being that repetitive, having parts where you're not playing a whole bunch of stuff. Like church music, the keyboard players were just playing so much music. James stripped it down and just said, you know, and that funk was born.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have anyone else?
Hi. You talk about gospel, and I'm wondering if you know like people like Odita or Malia Jackson or Alan Lomax recordings, all that gospel stuff.
Yeah, I studied a lot of gospel. I'm sorry. Did you say Mahalia Jackson?
Yeah.
Yes, I love Mahalia. You know, I love the Clark sisters. You know, Karen Clark Sheard. You know, I love older gospel, James Cleveland. Younger gospel, Karen Clark Sheard, daughter Kiera. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I love gospel music and mass choir music. And I love praise and worship. I love praise and worship music, Israel Houghton. So what I dig about the gospel music of today is gospel music is starting to open up more and more to embrace different styles. And I studied a lot of gospel music. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. Growing up, my parents used to play Just a Touch.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that music.
Oh, thank you.
My question dates back to you growing up.
Mm-hmm.
You said you grew up in a house where there was always music around. If you didn't turn out a musician, what would you probably turn out?
I loved baseball. I was a second baseman, and I had skills. I had skills, and for a while, I was torn between what I was going to do. I made the All-Star team. I had won batting titles in my little league teams, and I was considered at my age one of the best baseball players in my city. And I loved baseball. But I also would play in the drill team, play drums for the drill team. And, you know, I'd miss baseball practice because I was playing the drums, or I'd miss, you know, a drill team practice because I was playing baseball and I had to make a choice. And I chose music, and my father didn't speak to me for about a month. He's like, dude, man, being a musician, that's not gonna fly. Baseball is what it is. Because he was a football player in high school and a very good one, so he thought the baseball thing should, go down. But I chose music, and, that was the right thing for me because, like I told you, I'm emotionally funky. I love this stuff. This is great.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else?
Yes, hi.
Hey.
I noticed you kept coming back to the band Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Could you please expand a little bit on how they influenced you as a drummer and or as a vocalist?
Bill Bruford on drums was just killing. His snare sound I loved, and his use of space. He did some things with King Crimson as well. I'm feeling all of Bill Bruford's stuff. Yes, vocally, they had this angelic thing happening. Their chords, I'll just do a little dawn of light lying between the silence and sowed sources, chased amid fusions of wonder, of moments hardly seen forgotten, colors and pastures and chance dancing leaves cast spells of challenge, amused but real in thought, we fled from the sea hole. John Anderson's thing was killing me. That's from the first song, the Tales of Topographic Oceans album. I dug his approach because it sounded honest. Same thing with James Taylor. I love James Taylor's vocal. It's so honest sounding. Aretha, it's just honest. I like artists that sound honest, that you can pick it up right away. Yes does that for me, especially when Bruford was in the band. I like it. I like Yes when Alan White came to the band. That's great. I love their material with him as well. But Bruford had that space, and Bruford was funky. That stuff he played on Roundabout and Close to the Edge album, that stuff is just funky. Him and Chris Squire are getting it in. So yeah, I can talk about Yes and Mahavishnu Orchestra all day.
Go right ahead.
Well, let me tell you about Mahavishnu. I went to a show. The headliner was Curtis Mayfield. Much love. Any Curtis Mayfield fans in here? Much love to the great Curtis Mayfield. But on this show, it was like a festival sort of deal. Frank Zappa was on the show, and a group called Mahavishnu Orchestra, which I had never heard before. Now, this is 72? Yeah, 72. I'm a young homie. I'm 16. I'm like, and at that time, I was in all types of music. So, yeah, I was there to see Curtis Mayfield, but I was also there to see Frank Zappa do Peaches and Regalia. I was also there for that. But I didn't know about, Mahavishnu Orchestra. So they open up. This is crazy. And I'm like, I don't see where's all the stands? It's like all I saw was this huge drum set. Billy Cobham was playing like the biggest drum set I had ever seen. And he has this big gong in the back. And I'm like, where's the orchestra at? So these 5 guys walk out. 4 guys. 5. Yeah, I told you I was 57. Sometimes I have fun. They come out on stage. They're wearing like these white linen sort of things jumping off, And I'm like, that don't look like no orchestra to me. And, I'm kind of chilling with the homies and they kick in and my mouth drops to the ground. And they kick into the then album that I didn't know was Inner Mounting Flame with Meeting of the Spirits, the first song off that album. And they commenced to ripping stuff up so much. I've never been the same. After leaving there, I completely said, I have to get in the shed and get my drumming together because I'd never heard anything like that. And then I said, what's all this time signature, weird time signatures, Indian sounding stuff? That's what got me off into Train. That's what got me off into Miles. They hit me so hard. That's why I know the power of music. They hit me so hard. I said, there gotta be a God for somebody to hit like that. I mean, I'm serious. It revolutionized my concept about music, and it touched me in my spirit so deeply. It helped me to start going on my spiritual journey to not be fearful to do it. Because John McLaughlin and Billy Cobham, Jan Hammer and those cats, Jerry Goodman on violin, Rich Laird on bass, they changed my life. Has anybody heard some music that's changed your life? Not you just dug it, but changed your life. I'm gonna ask you a question. Has anybody heard music that's changed their life? Yeah. Then you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just filleted you, ripped you up, diced you. They had to pick you up off the ground, you know what I mean, in pieces. Your eyes are over here, your forehead is over there. I mean, that's what they did to me. I was destroyed. They had to get my molecules together after that. That's how destroyed I was. I was similarly like that when I first saw Stevie Wonder. I was destroyed. I was just like, I know there's a God. I mean, music that hits you like that. Yeah, I'm having fun right now, man. Oh my goodness. I felt the same way when I heard Stravinsky for the first time, Firebird Suite. I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, music is mighty. That honest stuff will just tear through you like a ray from Star Trek. Yeah.
Well, do we have any other questions? Cool. I guess that's a good note to end on. Unless you'd like to tell us about some more music. I think we could listen to that all day.
Well, I will say this. Just everybody has their thing. When I say I'm into different styles and in the current music and all that, it's not to say that people who are more into one style or two style versus another. Like, I'll tell you who else lynches me. And probably not a good word to say when I tell you his name, but Hank Williams Sr. Y'all could put that together, yeah. Hank Williams Sr.'s phrasing is like the bomb. I mean, I don't care. It's Hank Williams Sr.'s stuff is honest. It's just honest. But I don't put that on anyone else to say, well, you know, I ain't feeling country like that. You know, or I'm not feeling today's music. You know, I got homies who's like, man, I can't deal with it. I'm not judging that. But I say to you, at your age, you know, just allow yourself to stay in the moment because it's only for a season anyway. It's only for a time. And then you're gone. Just absorb it. That's what I'm doing. I'm looking at you, and you know what? I will say this too. People like, why do you groove all the time? Why can't you sit still? And that's because if I can feel where that pocket is, if I can interpret it, then I can do it. Don't forget that. If you can interpret it, then you got it. That's why I don't care what it is. I'm grooving. I'm trying to find where that thing is at. Because if I can interpret it with my body, and you know, that damn groove, funk groove was different than the slave things and my body language was different. You know, when you interpret, that's something Michael Jackson was able to do with his dancing. He could interpret so much of the song, and you were watching the music with his body. His body was interpreting the music. For me, if I can grab that pocket, I can get it. I don't know if that works for somebody, but I'm throwing it out there for somebody who can snatch that one up.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Mr. Steve Arrington.